Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we are creating public education advocates and where we talk about the practice, the pedagogy, and the politics around public education. As always, I ask that you write your name in the comments and let us know any questions, any observations about the topic we're discussing. Because you know, I'm a longtime teacher and I like an actively participating class. So if you come and listen later, you can still leave your question because I'll get notified and I'll respond to your question. So thank you for coming in, and let's get started with our, first of all, it's April. April is Child Abuse Month. And of course, anytime we can circle back and reflect on how to keep kids safer. And a flyer caught my eye. This is from the trainingcenter.net, DCA Training Center, which is providing national leadership child abuse on child abuse issues. And the title is interesting because now it says keeping your child safe in the real world and virtual world. It used to just be, you know, home or school, but now we have to talk about the virtual school. And then really we had to talk about that before COVID, but now COVID has made that even more real, right? Kids are spending much more time in the virtual world. So teaching children about stranger danger isn't enough. More than 90% of sexual abuse perpetrators are someone that the child knows and trusts. 90%, folks. So the stranger danger, all that stuff that we used to do in schools, I mean, there's 10% of it, but 90% is someone they know and they trust, and that's important. So what do we have to do? Good communication decreases a child's vulnerability to sexual abuse. We have to take the time to talk, right? Be calm and confident talking to your child about this topic and really any topic. You should always be talking to your kids and looking for any reason to talk to your kids. How was school today? What did you learn? Tell me more about that. Having question prompts that lead the child to have to answer questions, right? Don't put shame around sexuality or body parts. Allow your child to process and ask questions. And so there's a lot of questions here. We'll put the flyer in the comments. But you also need internet safety. Keep your computer in a central location in your home. Know how to set parental controls and check your browser files. Monitor what websites your child frequents. Encourage your child to never give out their personal information. Encourage your child to tell you if someone online is making them feel uncomfortable. So these are good reminders, and it has a little red block in here. And this is sort of new. I've seen it before, but it's new on a sort of major flyer. And that is, if you personally have experienced abuse and never sought help, the best thing you can do for your child is to heal yourself. So, Mr. Glover, I had you on during that time because I know that you serve kids, and I know that you can use this message to pass it on to kids and parents. So I will be making sure you get a copy of this flyer as well. But
okay. Thank you, Dr. Good.
Kids cannot be communicated with enough on this subject, and to be wary of people who make them feel uncomfortable. All right, well, so we have another interesting subject, and it's one that I came to you about because I've had white people come and say they don't understand the issue around Aunt Jemima and the pancake idol and emblem. And so I sent you the article on the fight to commemorate Nancy Green, the woman who played the original Aunt Jemima, because there's some white people who feel like a huge disservice has been done to Nancy Green by removing her from the bottle, from the product. And so I reached out to you because I knew that you would help us unpack this a little bit and help us understand where, you know, how the African American community weighs in on this issue.
Well, Dr. Good, I think that this issue is very much aligned with your discussion on child abuse. And the reason I say that is that in a nation where we have systematically abused African American children for over 400 years without remorse through images such as Aunt Your Mama. Growing up with cartoons, as I did as a child, seeing caricatures on cartoons on Saturday mornings. I'll be 65 Monday, so anyone my age or near my age, we should all, first of all, tell the truth. We understand that this country has used ethnic notions and negative images of African people for hundreds of years. They used lynchings on postcards. They used images on in cartoons and all sorts of places. All the while, I consider this to be child abuse uh, because children grew up with negative perceptions of themselves, even myself. When I say myself, those of us who saw images that define us as animal-like, uh, heathenistic, etc. Children who were eaten by alligators in cartoons as I grew up on Saturday mornings, African American children, tigers chasing them up trees. So I'm suggesting to you that the idea of Aunt Your Mama is directly in line with this. I will submit to you in your audience a video that, if you may see a clip, is called Ethnic Notions, and it gives a historical analysis of these images and their origins and how they play out in the life of American popular culture, particularly white American popular culture. Just as when African people were brought here, bringing our foods and other things with us, we were not allowed to bring our drums, so we brought the banjo. Africa brought it, but it was soon thereafter uh, uh, faces black, and began to sing and make jokes of the African experience. Again, child abuse, because children are seeing these negative images. We've done this for years. Aunt Your Mama, and I grew up on Aunt Your Mama, of course, we all have. But Miss Green, I submit to you, she was never called Miss Green, so we'll give her that honor today. Miss Green, who was an actual person there in America, Chicago, and South, come out the South, raised white young people. But the story of her history is that she had a recipe that she cooked and made for breakfast bread, which we call pancakes. As I've shared with others, we have a cornbread in African American culture where we make like a whole cake or a cake that's like a pancake, but I make it here at home today. It's like a pancake, but it's cornbread. So her knowledge of this became something that someone took from her and actually created this company around which we now have this pancake industry. And they use her imagery, the Aunt Your Mama, the wrapped head servant, as the image. And she went around the country at fairs and other places cooking pancakes. And I'll submit to you primarily for white people. And it was at these places that they were very excited because they were used to seeing this mammy image, if you will, this maid image. And so she lived her life out, but sad to say, as I've shared with you, that she died in a pauper's grave, no headstone, no relatives. So I hear people saying that they're concerned about Aunt Your Mama, but not concerned about Mrs. Green.
So you're right about that, and and just to flesh it out a little bit more, just so that we can have a little bit of comfort knowing that she will be having a headstone now.
Yeah, as a result of an individual who, as we know, as I said, honor with you, someone who has done the research and who's doing this to restore and got in contact with one of her distant relatives and began this process. Mm-hmm.
So I think what people need to understand is just because she lived a better life than most other African Americans in her time doesn't make it okay what happened. Would that be a
Correct. She lived a better life, but also many African Americans lived a better life during that particular time who basically entertained white people. There were clubs like the Cotton Club, where African Americans performed, but never could go in as patrons. But the entertainers certainly lived a better life than the average African American or Negro at the time. This is very well known. So that many African Americans in this country during the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s and so forth, that if they were entertainers or played the role of some entertainment, that they would have a different quality of life, if you will. But these individuals still lived a restricted life in terms of their movement in society, of where they could live, of where they could attend school, etc. And I believe Mrs. Green even spoke up for some of these issues during her life, as did other people who were able to become social activists as a result of gaining that advantage in life.
And yes, she was able to further the cause, the African American cause, during her time when she was alive.
Yeah.
But again, we have to, and I think this is a takeaway. And again, correct me if it's not all the way fleshed out, but she led a better life after not getting credit for her pancake mix, right? So having a caricature of her on the product labels, not really being given royalties or whatever the income that is that somebody whose product is being used should have had, and worked until the very end. She got run over by a car in her 80s, and then went to a grave with no headstone. So I think we have to be careful about quickly jumping to a conclusion that she's being wronged. She was being wronged then. So how do you feel about her being removed from the product label?
Well, I feel she should never have been on a product label. Here again, we're talking about a product that, if the nation had given her and many other people of color their just dues in terms of their copyrights or their creation or inventions, etc., would have lived an independent life of wealth and social status. But we did not have that then, and do not have a great deal of it now. So we see a number of things, even in identification of African American food identities. I go to markets today and I see all sorts of foods that are identified as Hispanic and Asians and European, etc., different cultures. Very seldom do we see foods that identify with the African American experience, if you will. So in terms of the historical creation of Aunt Jemima, Uncle Ben, all of these images, they were created at a time when the African identity was not respected. It's an issue of humanity. It's an issue of truth about humanity. So that we must recognize that, particularly in white America, the truth has not been told about who African people are. And so subsequently, we have this issue today, and then we have the discussion of whether or not her history is being taken away. Aunt Jemima, as I said, more people were concerned about Aunt Jemima and than they were Mrs. Green, And so it says to us that people are still connected to this ideal of the Southern motherly image, if you will, of the African American maid, nanny, mammy, etc., etc., juxtaposed to the real psychological, emotional issues and damage that it had on African American people, and even on European American people, because it causes a false narrative.
It's true. And so a lot of people might be tempted to say, well, that's in the past. Why do you have to dig up the past? Well, let's just go to our next piece that we talk about, and that was just very recently. That is Aledo ISD students punished for slave trade auction on Snapchat of Black classmates. What the heck? I mean, and it's probably because I've been working with you for so long, and my history goes together gosh, 20 years? I don't remember now, but
Nothing.
how does this keep happening?
Well, I think it goes back to child abuse again. Not just African American child abuse, but European American child abuse. I think European American children must be told the truth. I think European American children must be. You mentioned to earlier regarding issues of sexual abuse. Uh, you have to talk to children. You have to be honest with children. And I think that until we have European Americans or white American parents and adults who can be honest, and I think it has to work. They have to work at being honest with themselves. I think it's a psychological, emotional process. It's the same with African Americans. We have to work at being honest with ourselves as well. I deal as much with African Americans who are not engaged with understanding the truth of our journey as African people in America. I don't use the word slaves. We are African people who were enslaved. Slavery is a condition and not a people. We must understand who we are as a people who came from a continent that had problems as well, but also made contributions. We struggle with who we are. What's our name? Are we African? Are we colored? Are we Negro? Are we black? We have these debates among ourselves. So for me, I talk about geographical realities. So there is a place called Africa. There's a place called Europe. There's a place called Asia. So I deal with these cultural geographical realities. And so until we are able to discuss this in an open manner and then look at what slavery was and how it impacted our nation, I've just had a journey today in cotton. This whole experience of our state and our country is centered around the buying and selling of human beings. It is as real as it is as America as apple pie. And so, in light of where we are today, and given what is perceived to be a movement to go back to good old America and to make America great again, and to reflect back on this past, and we hear parents talking about what's happening in the world and how America is losing its history, then certainly I would see the children would pick up on those issues as well and play them out in school and on the internet.
I don't remember if I told you this, but there's a bill being considered in the Texas legislative session to mandate ethnic studies. And it's probably 20, 30 years late, but that's time. I mean, when you go ahead.
So I'm very familiar with that bill, and when I was assistant to the superintendent at DSD. We advanced the whole issue in curriculum. I take a different approach, however, Dr. Good. When we talk about ethnic studies or trying to create African American studies and Hispanic or Mexican American studies as separate courses or classes over against the mainstream textbooks, we fall into the process of seeing something different, something over there. What we did at DSD, we pushed what we call multicultural textbook adoption, where all the textbooks with all the textbook writers would have to make sure that the textbooks were inclusive of African American, Hispanic issues, women issues, so that the mainline text would become the issue. Because what we find is that when you're having someone to teach something over there as an elective, to take it as an elective, it still has this sense of otherness as opposed to this point. You cannot. When I was teaching at SMU, I taught a course in African American Studies called Black and White. There's no way you can teach African American history in America without European American history. In reality, there is no way you can teach European American history without African American history, American Indian, and Hispanic and Mexican. It's no way. Now, you can create a false narrative, and that's what America has done. We've created a false narrative, and in the academic canon, which is built around what is called the Teutonic origin theory of a Germanic or European thesis, then that's what we've done. Now we must begin to create what's called an inclusive canon, so that we struggle now speaking about world history of the native indigenous people here, the Europeans who were in Europe, the Africans, how we all ended up in this place that we call America. That's where the real work comes in. It's not, I submit, to create, other narratives away from the mainland, because then it has that superiority and inferiority relationship. We're talking about creating one narrative that is inclusive, I submit, that would tell the truth.
Would you please talk a little bit more about the Teutonic mandate? Because when you shared that with me a long time ago, but still, it's It really helped me to understand and put things in place because that was almost like a worldwide happening. It wasn't from the
Yes.
so can you delve into that a little bit? I think we need to know more.
Certainly, academic education is all about establishing a canon, just like the Bible, what is called the biblical canon. And the canon, academic canon, is what is called the authoritative premise for which you do research, particularly in historical context. And the American Historical Society has given an award for years for what is called the Teutonic origin theory. One of the founders and propagators of that was a gentleman by the name of Herbert Baxter Adams. And all this can be Googled now, unlike years ago. And basically says that the essence of American history, i.e., culture and contributions, will be perceived and seen and taught from the perspective of Teutonic, Germanic, eventually Eurocentric perspectives, male. And that's how the textbooks were developed for many, many, many years. So whenever we challenged that particular canon, and we did that in the 80s, people began to holler political correctness. That we were trying to be politically correct rather than recognizing that we were trying to correct something that had been politically wrong, if you will. And still we're doing that today. Issue with women, the same approach. How we include this information as the challenge, so that as we look at textbooks, and I think that the reaction that you were speaking of is a quick knee-jerk reaction to say, oh, we can give the African Americans this course, or we can give the Hispanics this course, and we'll keep the mainline curriculum, if you will. So when you start talking about the STARS test or this test, the stuff you teach out here is not on the test. So then you have individuals who in the classroom who are not really going to focus on that anyway because it's not on the test. But if you put it on the test and it's a part of the test, what is given, then we have a different. I mean, if Benjamin Banneker is in the textbook, if Lewis Lattimore, if had it Fannie Lou Hamer's in the textbook, you see, then people will take them seriously.
And again, I think that some publishers are getting it, not ever quickly enough because the publishing process is so long, right? To get something approved, for example, through the Texas School Board with its politics and with the agendas that people bring in because they're elected positions. It's amazed a few years back they were trying to take out Cesar Chavez, for example, and you know, why would you even attempt? Of course, it was a huge outcry, but why would that even be? You would think would be okay to do, right?
Well, that goes back to the politics, as you just said, because we did have the textbooks changing the textbook content, and I was called upon later on when the Department of State, I mean the State Education Board changed, of course. Excuse me, and that's why the whole issue of voting today is so critical, and who votes and who gets elected, and who determines the decisions around our textbooks. And as I said, in addition, when DISD did it, we affected the whole nation because Dallas was a large school district, or is a large school district, and it impacted them a great deal. And then later on, we saw the politics change and it began to become more conservative, if you will. And I think that we need to speak to this whole issue, I think, and talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to politics and what is the difference between conservative and liberal. And I think that very and moderate. And I think that when we talk about conservative, and we hear that a lot these days, if we use the definition to conserve or preserve, and if we're talking about trying to preserve or conserve the past the way it was, then we must be open to challenging. I see a lot of conservative radio talk shows today, more than I do liberal and moderate talk shows. And it's as if we are engaging in a brainwashing, if you will, of our nation, so that people will hear of these conservative ideas of good old America, where we worked hard and so forth, which are all misnomers, because people in America who are women, who are people of color, have always worked hard, but have never benefited from the just dues of their labor. So I think that we must be willing to challenge our conservative brothers and sisters, and when we start talking about what are we trying to conserve, juxtapose as to what we're trying to create. And as well as our liberal brothers, as I tell people, I'm liberal and conservative depending on the issue that we're talking about. And so there's some things I sure want to. I want to conserve ethics and work ethic. I want to conserve scholarly discipline and respect of elders. I want to conserve those. I want to keep those things around. Yes, but I don't want to preserve or conserve racism, discrimination, segregation. I don't want to conserve those things. No. So we need to be very clear about what we're trying to preserve and conserve, and also be very careful about some of those things that we become too liberal on as well, because sometimes we can go too far to either extreme. And
you're right about that. So,
yes.
so how do you have your definition of woke yet? Because I don't.
Of
woke, that
oh.
if you're woke, then all of a sudden you understand all that we've done wrong, and we know how to
Well,
fix
I think that's not about it. You know, exactly. The African American community uses the word conscious. You know, you become conscious, if you will. Like, well, we again, I submit to you, we're in a historical point of transition. And this is unique about being alive today. Those of us who I'm 65 soon to be, we lived through a very unique period of history. We lived through a period of transition from segregation, desegregation to integration. We were the first generation, you and I, amongst first generations of African and European, or white and blacks, who got to know each other in a professional setting, somewhat on equal footing, if you will. Our mother and fathers didn't have that opportunity to see each other as you and I have seen each other over the last 20 or so years. So I think that we are in a unique transition. Transition, I say, change is inevitable, but transition is manageable. And what we do to manage this transition is critical, because just like the reconstruction of after the Civil War, where we had 10 years of radical reconstruction, where African Americans were engaged in political, economic, educational change. Well, white America did not work well with that transition. And I come back to you today and says, how is white America working with this transition? And oftentimes we ask the questions, and as I tell my students at the university, we have to learn to ask the right questions to get the right answers, because as long as we ask the wrong questions, we get the wrong answers. So I submit today, is the question really about Black America? Is it really? Is the question really about what white America is struggling with?
Well, and you're right about that. I think that I think one of the things that we have to transition into understanding is that it's the white power struggle. No, the power framework is being challenged, and there's pushback.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
The pushback, although I guess understandable, because anybody who's been in power for a long time wants
We'll
to
push back. Exactly.
right?
It's a natural process.
Right.
Right.
But sometimes change comes, and it's time for it, and we can never put you guys all back in the box, right? Just like you
Not
can't.
going back in, not going in the box.
I'm not going in the box either. I'm not. I got the vote only 100 years ago. I'm going to keep.
Right. That's
take
right.
that away from me. And
That's
so,
right.
And I know that it all seems to boil down to the white male, but it's not only the white male that has some transitioning to do. We have white females also who, in their innocence and ignorance, they want to do well, but they don't understand actually how they're furthering racism versus conquering it, right?
Well, I think what happens when we contextualize the terminology, I think it's important to call it, you have to call it, name it. In an area, in my work, I call it cause and effect. What is the cause of white racism? What is white racism? I have several books right here that I just happen to put on my shelf about white people that I have on my shelf, along with my many other books about, white teacher talks about race. See, here we have Waking Up White. Waking Up White. Healing Racism and Educator's Role. White. All these are books by white people. Now, I submit to you, Dr. Good, is that, and I like to challenge your audience, Let's hear white people talk about white racism. Painful that it is. I do the same thing when I deal with men. You talked about sexual abuse and so forth. When I talk about issues of women and objectification of women and rape, rape is not a female problem, it's a male problem. It's problematic for females. It's
Yes.
problematic for females. But rape is not a female problem. So we
Yes.
as men must have the conversation about how we have been framed and understand ourselves and issues of power, because and no matter whether it's white racism, whether it's rape, or whatever, we're talking about power issues, privilege issues here, no matter how they're packaged, you see. And so I would rather, even as we speak right now, because I'm sick and tired right now. As Fannie Lou Hamer said, I just left the place. I'm a young African American man whose mother is white, who's African American, if you will. He's mixed, but he's an African American young man with a son. Why are white people? We must deal with the fact that when white people go into African American communities that are poor, we call it the ghettos, we need to go back to the Kerner Commission report of 1968, where Otto Kerner, under President Johnson, said, "What Black America can never forget that white America doesn't understand that white America created the ghetto, white America supports the ghetto, and white America condones the ghetto." How is that place created that creates all of this poverty and all of these tensions and all of this mistrust that gives rise to what we still see today as some call the policing of African men, if you will, like after slavery, you see, the chasing, the slave chasers or the captors. We have a lot to unpack here. But what I would like to submit, let's look at the cause side versus the effect side. If we spend 80% on the effect side and never talk about the cause, we're never going to change.
Yes, you're exactly right. I mean, you and I have talked about some of the things that you and I can do together.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to tackle this. There's been just, it's a continual issue. We have another shooting yesterday of a car that was pulled over.
A traffic stop and a young man is dead.
In Minnesota, of
all places.
My brain just doesn't compute why somebody hasn't said to the police up there, they're almost untouchable right now, especially in cars. Okay, just you know what I'm saying?
Well, no, and it's yes, it's somehow we have to deal with this, and in this case, this is like in Dallas, this is a European American woman who shot the gentleman. But the whole use of deadly force, how it's used, again, the debate of training of knowing or not knowing whether it's a taser or not a taser, this type of thing. But in a larger scheme of things, again, I would like to come back to this earlier statement, because I want to hang something here. As I've shared to you before, I'm concerned about white men, and I want white men to hear that, because we don't say that. And I said it back in the 80s. I said, until we understand that the most oppressed person in the 21st century would be the white male. And I said it then, and I said it because as we were going through the transition of change, someone had to be concerned about this individual who was about to experience all of this social upheaval. We didn't care. We didn't care. Nobody stopped to say, "How do you feel? Let's talk about this." We didn't do that in America. We were very selfish as a nation and just wrote things in the law and said, "Okay, sorry, affirmative action, go, we didn't deal with his emotion and his pain. And I submit to you, and I know you in my African American community, some people I get kicked back from. But being a follower of Dr. King and an apostle of Dr. King, I know that social change does not come about simply by giving privilege to the oppressed. Social change comes about also by ensuring that the oppressor has a place in society as well.
And how do you see that best being done? In the schools? Where?
I think it starts really in the church. To be honest with you, the church is a place where you begin with all sort of ethical questions of what is right and wrong and good and bad and these types of things. And I believe that until we deal with these images of God and man and who is God and what a God looks like and things like that, that we're not able to deal with all these other issues, because I think the white male has been given a far too great a burden to bear. Uh, when I think about Easter and I look around during Easter time and so forth, and I see all these white men and images of who they say Jesus, God is, et cetera, depending on how you theologize, that's a heavy burden. When I see plain roles and things like that. The whole idea of myth is important, even in academia, in Greek mythology, and all sorts of things. And then we see this played out in today into what are called monomyths. Lone Ranger, Superman, stronger than light, faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive. That's pretty heavy for anybody to carry, but particularly as white men and boys grew up with this sense of this false monomything, if you will. So it goes from religion and theology and mythology down to our very textbooks,
So we built up the white male to be a Superman, and now we haven't trained him how to stand down.
That's right. We have literally created that, both in our theological context and our imagery context. I watch TV right now. It's everywhere. TV shows, and we must acknowledge that fact, that this individual has been given a false sense of superiority, having been created by himself in the beginning, having been supported now by his wives and others, and through media and technology. And I think it's time. It's time.
So I like to always leave our audience with a to-do. Right? And so I have an article here that is by an African-American writer, and she has a post that she does called I Do See Color. And she's had 82 so far in her series of I Do See Colors, 82 ways that she brings attention to how racism plays out in microaggressions, and it's things that white people don't even realize that they do. Many times, for example, they'll say things like, "Where are you from?" You're asking an African American person where they're from because they don't look like you, and you assume they're from Africa. I mean, I still hear that. I still hear that there are African Americans who are asked that. Of course, there are Asians who are asked that too. We had an Asian, Daniel Ng, last week, and he speaks English as well as I do because he grew up in here and went to Plano East High School with my kids, and yet people will ask him where he's from, assuming he just arrived yesterday, right? And so those are the type of things that we have to try to get better at not doing. Now, Daniel did say, "Hey, I'm curious as to where a lot of Asian people are from." So I asked him, "What's your ancestry? What's your, where's your family from?" And so he makes it a little bit clearer that he understands that they're American, but that their parents or grandparents may have come from another country. But so here is her 5 pieces of advice for white parents, and I want you to chime in if you've got more to add, because I don't really think she spent a whole lot of time, because this is a short article writer, because she's trying to make a point, go in and go out. So first of all, and this is a huge one, befriend Black people in person. If you want your child to be less timid around the topic of race and Black people, invite more Black people into your home. And she gave the example of her roommate's child who asked her if she had burnt her hands because her palms were lighter than the back of her hands. And so obviously the child had not been around enough Black people to understand that that's just what Black hands look like, right? And so there are tells with kids when they haven't had the opportunity to be around other people of color. So that I think is one would think it's a no-brainer, but I know there's some people in the audience saying, "I don't know anybody of color." Well, You can go to a park. You can go to an art gallery. You can go to the store. There are people of color in other cultures in other areas that you visit. They, start somewhere, but don't use the excuse that you don't know personally anybody of color, and then figure out how you can know somebody of color. Expand your children's educational lessons. So this one, and I shared offline that I was a little confused by this one. This author says, this writer says, during a particularly restless day at my grandparents' house, my grandfather sent me downstairs to his basement to write Roman numerals from 1 to 100. I wasn't happy. I wanted to hang in the backyard and play board games, but him assigning me to do something I found dreadfully boring made me really good at it. I found books by African-American authors, and he made me read and summarize them, and the exposure alone makes people better, and it made me be able to have article outlines in college in milliseconds. But it doesn't really say that we should do the same for kids for, is that for Black figures, Black writers, but you know what I'm saying? So can I assume that that's what she meant? To expand your children's educational lessons. So number 3 was a good one, and we had an example of that nationwide. Ditch the white savior complex. You and I had talked about this one. Cher recently got in trouble. Cher's a famous singer, and she tweeted that she thought that if she had only been there, after watching the trials, if she had only been there, maybe she could have done something, right? Well, people were furious at that tweet because there's that white savior thing popping up. Like an aging singer could have stopped 3 police officers from what they were doing, right? But it also minimized the witnesses that were there. You had an MMA fighter witness, you had a firefighter witness who tried to intervene. And so that was a great example of the white savior complex sort of coming out. Find other topics to talk about. If you cannot think of the last conversation you had with a Black person that didn't either purposely dodge the subject of race or immediately dive into it, then resolve this immediately. Black people are more than just Black people. If you feel uncomfortable talking to them about anything besides race, then you need to do it. And so what's that thing that we now say? Learn to be uncomfortable, right? And so if you're not comfortable talking to Black people about anything except race, then get comfortable talking to Black people about other things besides race. And expand your viewing preferences. That is, don't just watch what white people watch from Black entertainers, right? If your entire entertainment selection revolves around white people's views of Black people, there's your first problem. Regardless of how you feel about Bill Cosby, have you ever seen an episode of The Cosby Show? Did you watch anything past the first season without Maggie, A Different World? Do you know why Friends is such a hard pill to swallow after living single? Do you understand why Girlfriends is such an anomaly, even with Kelsey Grammer as the executive producer? If all of this sounds like gibberish, start there. Just look at projects that Black people are the stars of and were created and written and influenced by melanin-rich folks. And so I think that's a really good challenge for white people to do, because oftentimes we're given entertainment, like you said, for entertaining white people, not going to shows that are actually created for Black people, right?
Let me just 2 things.
Sure.
You used the term melanin rich. I did an article. Time did a story me years ago in '94 about melanin. But even as you mentioned the word melanin rich, I want the audience to understand that all human beings, other than albinos, have melanin in their bodies. Just different layers of melanin, tanning based upon our bodies. Because we in the African community sometimes think that we are, there's been a concept of superiority because we are highly melanized, if you will. So I don't want that to be sound off as, you know, oh, now these are the great people versus those people who don't have as much melanin. And because I've seen this battle go on now in my career. We're just all, matter of fact, with the students in my class, with Legacy, we do what we call melanin charts now. The sun, closer to the sun, near the sun, or whether, you know, it's all nature, it's all relative. And they know that and respect those different levels of melanin. But when it talks about friends at home, we need to be mindful of the fact that if we are talking about getting our children together, one of the great challenges that researchers showed out that if we allow our children to play together, and children would normally do that, they would learn languages together, they would learn all sorts of things together. But also we must recognize that they will also become friends or maybe boyfriends or girlfriends. Uh, they like each other. And I submit to the white community is that I believe they struggle with that more than we do, because in the African American community, we know who our white ancestors were. We deal with those individuals, just like the young man who was shot, his mother is white. But we know that when a person has a child by a black man or a white woman, that child in America is Negro or black, light-skinned Negro, if you will, and who's no longer, quote, white. So I just offer that as a challenge to white America, that as you open your house and doors to different cultures, just beware and be very mindful of the transition of relationships that you allow your children to go through. In other words, don't let them start playing it. And we see this oftentimes, that we see children start playing when they're a certain age, but when they get a certain age, they separate them from each other. Dr. Good, can you hear me?
Sorry, I muted myself. You made me think about the fact, memory I had of my second born, Austin, who was dating an American girl. It was interesting. She was the most popular girl in her African American group. My son was the most popular kid in his sort of white Hispanic group. And they sort of gravitated towards each other because they were curious about the other popular kid in the other group, right? And I remember that her coming with her dad. Her dad was very concerned about her coming and dating a white kid. And so you have it on both sides, folks. You know, it's now it didn't last long, and many of his relationships didn't. He didn't marry until later in life, but it was, you know, and that was 20 years ago. Something. Gosh, I couldn't even tell you. 1995, 96. So, gosh, those concerns for our own kids of whatever color are there. And let's recognize that parents are parents, kids are kids, and they, we need to get better at being open as parents to what our kids love and want to date and so forth. So anyway, well, thank you, Clarence. We always appreciate the time, and again, you help us unpack things in a way that many of us in the white community wouldn't have understood without your help. So thank you for that. I hope it's the last time we ever have to have this discussion, but I don't think it's going to be. I think that I have a few more shows to do before we can move into a more comfortable everybody living together and singing Kumbaya together. So I will let you go. I know you have another thing.
Students waiting.
Yes, you do. All right. Well, you take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Good, and best of luck.
Take care. Whew, that was a little heavy, but again, lots of learning there, folks. Lots of learning. And if you were a little bit uncomfortable, pat yourself on the back for being uncomfortable and for hopefully opening yourself up to saying, oh, I hadn't understood it that way. So our last bit together is going to be, let me find this, a very current thing. You know, I hope that I model bringing new information and model learning. And so one of the things that caught my eye very timely is Johnson & Johnson, Pfeiffer, and Moderna side effects. How do they compare? I think that that's huge in all of our worlds, education or no education, right? And so let's see, and especially now that Johnson & Johnson has been put on hold, right? There have been more than 6.8 million doses of Johnson & Johnson given out. We've had some blood clots. I think either 6 or 8 women have had blood clots shortly after getting it, so they've pulled that off the market for right now. And we're down to Pfeiffer and Moderna. But so let's see, experiencing side effects is not a bad thing. Matter of fact, when I had my second shot, I experienced things that I hadn't experienced in 20, 30 years. I never get sick. I haven't taken a sick day in, I can't even remember, a decade or more. But I took Tylenol for the first time in, again, 10, 20, 30 years. I don't know, because of the headaches and the chills and so forth. So the good news is that our part is that a brisk response equals an effective response. Okay, let me say that again. The good news on our part, on the doctor's part, is that a brisk response, like I had, it equals an effective response. That's almost what you want. Said Dr. Mark Wolfman, Chair of Family and Community Medicine for Cook County Health in Illinois. It tells us that the vaccine is working. Our bodies are forming a robust immune system response, and we feel that that's a positive thing. So does one vaccine report more side effects than the other? Good question. According to Pfeiffer, about 3.8 of their clinical trial participants experienced fatigue as a side effect, and 2% got a headache. Moderna had a 9.7 of their participants feel fatigued, and 4.5 got a headache. So like Pfeiffer and Moderna, they had less side effects, I understand, but their main side effects, like the others, for some, like my husband, were the pain at the shot area and fatigue. A lot of people I know had fatigue and not some of the other stuff that I had. There are also some factors that could make you more likely to experience side effects, and that is if you're young, right? If you're young, because your younger people have more robust immune systems and react more to it. And so, according to Dr. Loafman, the body's immune system is what creates the symptoms. And so he also noted that women are more likely to report side effects than men. Oh, and why is that? Well, this is because women may be better reporters. We may be more verbal men, they tend to suck it up sometimes and not say anything even when they're feeling bad. But estrogen can elevate immune responses while testosterone can decrease it. At the same time, a lot of your immune modulating genes can live on an X. And guess what women have? They have 2 X's. And so that could increase our response to it. So this data from the CDC also reported women are more likely to experience side effects than men. And so from December 14th through January 13th, more than 79% of side effects were reported by women, while women received roughly 61.2% of doses administered during that same time. Side effects could depend also on whether you've had the coronavirus or not. Oh, interesting. And so we have seen more likely that people report some side effects because that is acting a little bit like a booster dose to your immune system if you've already had COVID. So now, not getting side effects isn't a negative thing, health experts say. If you don't get side effects, doesn't mean that you're not protected. They want to be clear about that. But you're still making antibodies, which is, what you want to do. And so I hope that's one of those, oh, okay, that's interesting. As we come to the end of our show, as always, it's a fast hour with good information. We thank Professor Freedom, Clarence Glover, for coming on and helping us deepen our understanding of how how the understanding that white people have often about racism needs to be understood differently. And so, again, if you felt uncomfortable, then you grew a little bit. So thanks for being on today. I hope you left a little bit more educated in our topic and what's happening in public education. And we talked a little bit about the politics and some practice and so forth. But mostly, I hope that you left with the understanding of how important it is for you to know this, to not only the racism, but just to understand that you need to be well versed in the politics around public education, what's happening with educating our kids to get them to be better citizens. As you can see by what happened in that school district, we still have some work to do with our kids. And so I hope that you will come back next week and continue your education with me around how to become better advocates of public education and you know, bring some friends with you so that we can spread the word about our advocacy army for public education so that we can have a stronger economy in the future. See you next week, everyone. Stay safe.